attacks and the protests against U.S. embassies around the world, the UN is talking this week about creating international law that would ban blasphemy. But would something like that trump the U.S. Constitution? Ben has the reality check you won't see anywhere else.
It seems like every day there are new attacks on free speech, and they come in the form of stopping hate speech or preventing hurtful speech. And one of the latest attacks is coming from the United Nations. This week, there have been renewed calls for an international law that would ban blasphemy. So here's the backstory. Turkey currently holds the post of Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC. It represents 56 member states, mainly Muslim-majority countries. The OIC has spent the last several years pushing for an international defamation of religion law at the United Nations. OIC resolutions against the defamation of religion pass the UN Human Rights Council every year from 1999 to 2010, and the UN General Assembly every year from 2005 to 2010. Now, none of these resolutions were binding, which means none have entered international law. But this week, the push has come back, that something more must be done. And it's all based on these violent protests across the Middle East. Those protests, of course, over a controversial YouTube video called The Innocence of Muslims. That video reportedly blasphemes the Prophet Muhammad. So maybe the UN has a point, right? Well, maybe not. Keep in mind, there is a major problem with the narrative that these violent protests across the Middle East were all the result of that YouTube video, because they weren't. Consider what happened in Libya. We told you the very next day that the attack in Benghazi that resulted in the death of U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 others was the result of blowback. It wasn't because of a YouTube video. It was an attack coordinated by al-Qaeda fighters and an affiliate group called Ansar al-Sharia. Reports indicate the attack was in retaliation of a U.S. drone strike in June of an al-Qaeda leader from Libya who went by the name al-Libi. What's worse, our government knew that was the case within 24 hours of the attack, and yet they continued to claim it was the result of that YouTube video. According to the Daily Beast, 4 separate U.S. officials have now confirmed that within 24 hours, the administration knew where this attack came from, saying, quote, "There was very good information on this in the first 24 hours. These guys have a return address. There are camps of people and a wide variety of things we could do." And today, Libya's president told NBC News that the attack was without question al-Qaeda and had nothing to do with that YouTube video. Of course, there are a number of problems with what the State Department has told us about the Libya attacks, including the fact that we've been continually told that Chris Stevens was killed at the U.S. consulate in Libya. And yet, according to the U.S. State Department's website, there is no consulate in Benghazi. In fact, there's only one embassy or consulate in Libya, and it's in Tripoli. No embassy or consulate in Benghazi, where the attack happened. So where was Ambassador Chris Stevens killed? Well, we still don't have an answer to that. But aside from that, this is only one country, right? What about the riots in Egypt? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Because it was on September 11th that the attack in Benghazi and then attacks at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo started all of these violent protests. A CNN crew was on the scene just before the crowd in Cairo, Egypt erupted in violence against the U.S. Embassy there. But protesters told CNN they were demanding the release of Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman. He's known as the Blind Sheikh, and he's being held in a U.S. prison. But once the riots began, CNN just played right along with that false story that the riots were sparked by the YouTube video. So what you need to know is that to even begin talking about the need for protected speech from blasphemy is really a joke when the argument it's based upon is all untrue. But even if it were true, and again it's not, blasphemy laws do nothing to protect religion. They do everything to oppress it. If the United States wants to lead the world, why not be the real voice of free speech, the one that actually stands for it, truly protects it? Of course, that stance might require that Americans change the way we think about what kind of speech should be protected and what should not. And that is Reality Check.
If you would like to make your voice heard on the story, head over to Ben's Facebook page. Find it by searching Ben Swann, WXIX.